Good evening and welcome to the WDSU News Hot Seat. I'm Travers Mackle. Tonight we're talking about a controversial editorial written by a writer for the Chicago Tribune in which she says that she wishes Chicago could have a Katrina-like event. This topic blew up social media last week on Friday, Twitter, Facebook. It prompted the writer to write another story about this topic. We're going to delve deep into this. We're joined now by three men. Billy Nungesser, former Plaquemines Parish President, State Senator J.P. Morrell from New Orleans, and Walter Leger, the former Vice Chair for the Louisiana Recovery Authority that played a key role in recovery after Katrina. Let's look at some of these quotes by Kristen McQuarrie. The article was titled, "In Chicago, Wishing for a Hurricane Katrina." The title was later changed to "Chicago, New Orleans, and a Rebirth." And here's one of the quotes. "I find myself wishing for a storm in Chicago, an unpredictable, haughty, devastating swirl of fury, a dramatic levee break, geysers bursting through manhole covers, a sleeping city forced onto the rooftops." You all have very strong opinions about this. Let's just go right to left with you, Billy.
I tell you, obviously she wasn't there rescuing people for days, animals, not knowing where our next meal would come from, safety of the people, and it's such a horrible comment to make as we approach this anniversary, especially people that went through it, rescuing people. I had 30 people that lived with me that I rescued that I didn't even know spent months at my house, and obviously they wouldn't think the same thing either.
Almost 2,000 people in the metro area died, JP. You took action. You wrote a letter last Friday to the editors at the Chicago Tribune.
I did. I mean, I think when you read this article, it really stinks of like an intellectual elitism where he just took the humanity and the tragedy out of the storm and just portrayed this, just turned it into this really awkward metaphor for a social statement that really had no context. I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at whatever problem Chicago has, when you talk about 2,000 people dead, when you talk about her last metaphor in her story talks about, "I wish we here in Chicago are on our rooftops of the people were in lower Ninth Ward with SOS." That is so asinine and ridiculous when you think about it in that context. People were dying, begging for help to live, and she's comparing it to some kind of moral allegory for Chicago's corruption. And it's so offensive.
And we all know Chicago, well published, well documented, has issues right now with crime, corruption. Walter, does this open up wounds for people? You played a key role in the recovery with the LRA. You saw how it took off on social media. Does it open up wounds for people?
Well, you know, one of the horrible things about what happened after Katrina is we didn't just lose our homes. We lost, 2,000 people. And when we lost our homes, we also lost our churches, we lost our grocery stores, we lost our dentists, we lost our dry cleaners, we lost everything in a community that makes your house your home. And to remind us of that in such a light way, in such a pseudo-intellectual way around the anniversary of Katrina really does kind of bring up the scars.
And there's some factual inaccuracies in this too, if you will. A lot of people have pointed these out. She makes it seem, and there's a line here, that New Orleans residents overthrew a corrupt government, that basically everything was corrupt before Katrina hit, and that was the day where everything got better. Not exactly factually accurate.
No, we had issues, and a lot of that had nothing to do with Katrina, both before and after the storm, and it will be into the future. But Katrina did not cause the corruption. Katrina did not make it go away. It brought it to light, and a lot of things happened after Katrina where public officials did wrong and went to jail. But to compare that and act like the water washed away the corruption is ridiculous.
You're chomping at the bit. Both of you.
It's the opposite. I mean, when you look at the most high-profile convictions for corruption, they were directly related to Katrina. I mean, the fraud that took place, Ray Nagin, the fraud took place after the storm when people were squandering recovery dollars and spending them in horrific ways. I mean, really, it emboldened people that were corrupt to do more corrupt things that led to their conviction. So, I mean, to say that, to give this whitewashed revisionist history that suddenly New Orleans turning into that city on the hill or something is just ridiculous.
Travis, a lot of good things have happened in the New Orleans area since Hurricane Katrina. To say that this horrible disaster caused the good things is what's so ridiculous about it. Because what's really happened after Katrina is that the soul of New Orleanians, the soul of the people here, rose up, put together, got together and started fighting to rebuild New Orleans. You saw the resiliency of the people of New Orleans rebuilding this region. It wasn't Katrina that rebuilt the region. It was the fact that we fought back after the disaster. And things are improved. A lot of good things are happening. Businesses coming to New Orleans, a lot of good things are happening. We have a lot to improve. To say that a community should invite a horrible disaster so it can get better is really a ridiculous assumption.
Well, I think anybody would agree with you. Anybody who was here who lived with Katrina would say you want no part of this at all. It's amazing when you talk to people around the metro area, whether it be New Orleans, Jefferson, Plaquemines, St. Tammany, all of them say we don't wish this upon anybody. That's what caught everybody off guard with this. The writer, Kristen McQuarrie for the Chicago Tribune, wrote a follow-up article saying that she didn't want to offend anybody in New Orleans when she wrote this. She was just trying to prove a point, but I think the point has been made by now by the people of this area and the city that it was not a point well taken when you use Katrina as an example of how things can improve in Chicago.
Absolutely. And in this, we had people from all over the world come to help us rebuild, help us gut our homes, and help rebuild this community. And it was a great thing to see these people from all over, their passion and love come into the city and the surrounding communities and help out. And at a time of this anniversary, we should be celebrating all those people, all the great things that had happened for Katrina, after Katrina. This kind of article does nothing good for anybody.
But it's more than that. I read her follow-up, and the issue is this. I really, really passionately dislike when people write something horrific, and their follow-up is, oh, wait, you misunderstood me. If she didn't actually say, I'm sorry for offending everyone in New Orleans, sorry for offending all these people who lost family members' lives, their homes, their livelihood.
Everything.
Everything. Really, her follow-up article was, oh, you just didn't understand what I was saying. You misunderstand me. Everything I wrote was fine. You just don't understand what I'm trying. And we understood it, and it was offensive and ridiculous, and it was apathetic, and it was just wrong.
But think about it, too. What she basically said was insulted the people in New Orleans regarding a horrible time. I gave an interview shortly after the storm where one of the reporters said, the people of America are starting to get tired of hearing about Katrina. And my response was, we're tired of hearing about it. We're tired of feeling it. We're tired of smelling it. It's a bad, horrible thing. You can't imagine it. But what she also did, not to mention just insulting us, was she wished a bad thing on her own people in Chicago, not really appreciating the horrible disaster that this was, the impact it had on everyone's lives. Even if lives have improved in 10 years, the horrible scars that are left in families and people's lives.
You're absolutely right. We're getting close, very close, to the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. It's this month. Do you expect more editorials, articles that are going to be written that could be found offensive to some, Billy?
I think you will. I think locally and nationally you'll have people that didn't live through it, didn't see those people on the rooftops, didn't ride out the storm or come back right after to help people, and they have no clue what the people went through. And so when they're just writing a stroke of the pen, they don't realize the impact it's having on people in their lives. And remember, we still have people that are displaced that never came home. They got a job elsewhere. Families are still split apart. So it's still not back whole the way it was prior to Katrina. So those healings still have to continue.
We're 100,000 people in New Orleans Parish, fewer than what we were at Katrina. Tens of thousands of people are still displaced. Some may not want to come back. Others may be trying to get back. Is it important, JP, for state, city, parish officials to continue to get the message out of the good that's been done since Hurricane Katrina? Because I think we'll all have agreed on this. It is a tragic, horrible event that you can find a silver lining in the good things that have happened in the metro area since the storm.
I think it's very important for officials on every level to balance their message. The issue is that you don't want to whitewash that suddenly New Orleans is fantastic and everything's fixed and everything's great, because it really isn't. I mean, things have certainly gotten better. We still have a lot of challenges. I mean, right now, one of the challenges that bars people from coming back is one of the greatest benefits of the recovery. rental prices right now are astronomical. There are people who lived in New Orleans their entire lives who want to come back but can't afford to live back in the city. So there's a double-edged sword to what's going on, and I agree with Billy completely. At the end of the day, you have people that you meet on the street today who were not here during Katrina, who are a transplant, came 4, 5, 6, 7 years after, that when they talk about Katrina, they talk about it in these glowing ways like, man, I never would have found New Orleans but for after Katrina. And everyone needs to be sensitive, whether you're in the media or whether you're a person on the street. That person you're talking to might have lost a family member, might have lost their life, their friends, their home. You can't just keep talking about Katrina like it's a great thing. New Orleans has improved since Katrina, but you don't need to thank Katrina for that.
That's right.
Did you want to talk about that too, Walt?
Yeah, exactly. I think what's going to be important over the next few weeks as we are reliving Katrina and what we went through in Katrina is that we will be proclaiming how much better some things are, and we want the world to know that this is a good place to come and do business in. But at the same time, we have to be very cautious not to be accepting amongst ourselves nor broadcasting that everything is fine and we don't have problems to be solving. We still have a number of problems, including those things that we need to solve to bring people back, to bring the spirit, the soul of this city back to the city. At the same time, we want to keep New Orleans growing and progressing from a business sense, from an employment sense, but we have got to be real.
Final comment, Billy. So running out of time, you wanted to jump in on this too.
I think as the flood protection goes in place, we got $2 billion in levees being built in Plaquemines, and as we take this BP money and restore the coast, people that have not come back will get the comfort level that we won't have to hold our breath every hurricane season. We'll have a good line of protection out there, and we'll see more of those people come back that have yet to come back or scared to come back because the hurricane may happen next year or the year after. We'll have some breathing room and some real protection along the coast.
Unfortunately, we could talk about this topic for days. Kristen McQuarrie, Chicago Tribune editorial, but we're out of time. We thank Billy Nungesser, former Plaquemines Parish President, J.P. Morrell, State Senator, and Walter Leger, former Chair of the Louisiana Recovery Authority. We'll continue to cover the 10th anniversary of Katrina as we get closer and closer to the actual date. For now, let's send it back to you on the news desk.